Yeah, Mayor. Okay, thank you. For the record, this is a meeting of the Plan of Conservation Development Subcommittee of the Planning and Zoning Commission of New Canaan, Connecticut. Today is Monday, November 13, 2003. It's a little after 6 p.m. Start by calling the roll. Commissioner Benton, I believe, is absent today.
Yes.
Commissioner Herring is not here. Commissioner Nielsen.
Present.
Commissioner Radman.
Present.
Commissioner Turner. Is he on Zoom or here?
No, he's not.
No, here. And Commissioner Kriz, I'm here. Commissioner Radman, you'll be seated for Commissioner Benton tonight.
Sure.
So we have 3 people, so we have 8 quorum. Fair enough. Okay. The agenda for tonight, as published, item number 1, discussion on cultural, historic, and environmental conservation and enhancement, sustainability, and open space. I have a few opening comments. Today, we are taking a deeper dive in consultation with the New Canaan community into historical, cultural, and environmental conservation and enhancement, sustainability, and open space ideas, goals, and priorities. Your input will be crucial to this subcommittee as we proceed with the update of our plan of conservation development. We're glad you're here. It is clear from our successful community survey and our well-attended kickoff session in Lapham on October 26th that these are important matters for New Canaan, as they are important for this subcommittee. We will continue to be dedicated to an open and interactive process involving all voices. We hope the people of New Canaan will continue to be generous with their wisdom tonight, if possible with even greater vigor. Please help us help our town. I'm excited to discover what we will learn together as we hear our neighbors' insights and ideas. I hope we will have robust and friendly discussions on these weighty matters, with those discussions resulting in the very best New Canaan can offer. A few suggestions. 1, please get to the point quickly. 2, if you have detailed exhibits or language to share, it might be best to email those to the planning office in Town Hall. All information will be entered into the public record and reviewed by this subcommittee. In addition, this way you can ensure that what you want to say will be precisely received. 3, please be specific with goals and concepts. We seek clear, actionable ideas. And 4, please also be clear on priorities. If everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. Furthermore, remember that the town has only so much money and so much bandwidth. It might be best if we focus our resources on those matters that are most urgent. Our task here is to make sure New Canaan's updated plan of conservation development is a living, action-oriented document which contains a carefully prioritized set of goals and means to those goals that encompasses the best long-term vision for our town, a vision that will make our wonderful community even stronger, more resilient, and more welcoming for all. It is a privilege to serve the people of New Canaan. Before I recognize Zoning Chief Sarah Carey, who will kick things off with some slides containing relevant feedback from our town-wide survey and resident feedback, I want to review procedure. As we have 3 different, albeit related, topics tonight, we will start with historical conservation and then proceed to cultural conservation and end with environmental conservation, sustainability, and open space. This should help us focus our conversations. In addition, we will alternate between recognizing people who are physically here in this room and on Zoom. Usually we begin with those in the room and then eventually transition to Zoom. However, I don't want those who wish to speak but can only join us via Zoom to feel that they're at the back of the line. Thus, we will alternate. If you wish to be recognized, please raise your physical or virtual hand, and the chair will recognize you. Please come to the podium if you're here in the room and speak. Podium's right there. And everyone, please state your name when you begin. If you're on Zoom, if you could turn off your camera unless you are actually speaking, and if you also mute yourself unless you're speaking, it would be helpful to our process. Okay. Thank you. Ms. Carey, the floor is yours.
Okay. So Sarah Carey, town planner. Okay, so these are our results from the community workshop and the community survey that we had in September, and then the subsequent workshop that we had about 2 weeks ago. These are just topics that we found pertaining to historic preservation, cultural resources, and environmental resources, open space, and sustainability. There are obviously other issues that were highlighted, but this is specific to the topics we plan to discuss tonight. So just to briefly go through them, for historic preservation, we heard in the survey and the workshop concerns over the loss of historic structures in town, that there are many unprotected historic structures in town, and that there are neglected historic cemeteries in town. For cultural resources, we heard a few comments that residents felt that there are not enough cultural resources and amenities in town. And then for environmental resources, open space, and sustainability, we heard that there's a need for more and better connected open spaces, that there are light and noise pollution concerns, that there's a need to manage invasive species more effectively, that at times there's a lack of public awareness of environmental initiatives, that the town should be a leader in sustainability, that there's a need to protect groundwater aquifers, and that there's a loss of tree cover and native plants. So these were the concerns that we had compiled from the survey and the workshop. There are also some overlapping concerns that may involve topics that are discussed tonight, but that we feel will be better discussed at one of our later meetings. And for municipal and educational infrastructure, that includes the need for expanding sidewalks and our biking infrastructure, the need for green infrastructure pertaining to energy sources and transportation, such as EV charging stations, and stormwater runoff and water quality. And then for housing in downtown, there's a concern, and we'll talk about these later, for a need for sustainable new construction. And so those were all the concerns that we've heard from the survey and the workshop. We've also heard some solutions that have come out of this. And while this meeting is mostly about solutions, if we missed anything from what we heard, we're happy to hear those issues. And we'll be filling in this document tonight as we hear your comments. And then we have also heard some suggested actions already from the workshop and the survey, and also from comments that were emailed to myself over the last week. I know there were a few residents that emailed me today with topics and concerns and actions, and those were not filled into this document as that was created prior to today. So just because it's not in here doesn't mean we haven't heard you and it won't be added in. Nothing was updated today. And so for those of you on Zoom, or for anyone who has a computer, and I'm not going to read through every single one of these, but this is posted on our website. And you should be able to see me changing my screen. So on the newcanaan.info departments, planning and zoning, there's a 2024 POCD update page. All of this information is posted under community dialogue meeting materials. This is that presentation. And again, we'll be updating everything tonight and filling it in real time. And then for those of you who want to dive deeper into the survey results and the results of the community workshop, our 2024 POCD update page, if you click on that and scroll down to the bottom, we have our community survey results, and that's about a 40-page summary of the results. And then there's photos from the event, and then there's also a diagram completed by SLR that kind of deep dives into what we heard. So that is my topic, or my comments. I will hand it back over to you, Chairman Cruz.
Thank you. Just a reminder to the people on Zoom, if you could turn your cameras off and mute yourselves until you're recognized. Also, before we begin, I want to acknowledge the generosity of Planet New Canaan for the munchies out there, as well as the demonstration of the triple bin trash, one for landfill, one for recycling, and one for composting. The brownies are my own contribution. They're my triple death by chocolate brownies. They are gluten-free and nut-free, and please give them a try. So they're out there too. All right, why don't we start with maybe someone on Zoom for this? If anyone on Zoom would like to speak on historical preservation topic, please raise your hand and Ms. Carey will call on you. Thank you. Anyone on Zoom want to speak on the topic? No one yet. Okay. Well, we switch to the room. Anyone in the room would like to speak on historic conservation issues for our plan of conservation development? Nobody.
Really?
Okay. Well, I'm going to move on from historic preservation. We can come back to it later if people change their minds. Moving on to the second topic, which is cultural conservation and enhancement. We'll try Zoom again. Is anyone on Zoom interested in commenting on cultural preservation and conservation? No one yet? Okay. Anyone in the room would like to speak on the topic? Just raise your hand. I guess it's all environmental, huh? Let's hope so. Otherwise, I'm wondering what you're doing here. Okay. Anyone? Third and last call. We will cycle back to it later. Okay. Let's get to the topic then. Would anyone we'll start with in the room this time, like to speak on environmental conservation and enhancement, sustainability, and open space? If so, please raise your hand and you'll be called on. Anyone? Gentleman here in the sweater, saw you first.
Is this on?
It is.
It
Please.
is? Okay. I'm Robin Fryer. That's Robin Bates Mason over there, same name. So you said be concise, so I'll try and do that. I'm speaking as a private citizen, but I am also the chairman, president, of the New Canaan Land Trust. So
Okay.
I have a deep interest in environmental conservation. So 3 points I just wanted to make, and I'll do it briefly. One, the town has a land acquisition fund. It has been funded pretty much on an ad hoc basis until now. This has been raised by the Conservation Commission with the Board of Finance. We need to find a systematic way of funding the land acquisition fund. So when open space from water companies or anybody else comes on the market, we have a basis to step in and make a purchase. That's number one. Number two, and I don't need to dwell on it, gas leaf blowers. All I will say is if what comes out of those things came out of your exhaust pipe when you went to have the emissions check, you'd be thrown off the road. So you know all about that. It is something we need to address in the next 10 years. Number three, this concerns me as someone living, as you do, sir, in the area where we're on well water. A lot of properties use chemicals, especially on the lawns. You see those yellow signs everywhere. I think we all know where those chemicals end up, in the groundwater that we drink. So I think we need to address that. That's me. Thanks.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
You mentioned gas leaf blowers. There are other small two-cycle engines that are used besides leaf blowers. There are lawn mowers and many others. Would you restrict our focus to simply leaf blowers or other types of small two-cycle engines?
Good question. I mean, ideally all. I mean, these two-stroke engines, which put oil in our
Right.
health. I mean, we could go on and on about the health hazard to the users. But I'll tell you where we live. I mean, you could when they're going full blast, you can smell it outside from 20, 30 yards away. So ideally, yes, but I think I'm not an expert on the subject, but I think, the noise factor is probably greatest from those leaf blowers more than lawn mowers. From a health standpoint, pollution of the atmosphere, I'm not sure. But I think, generally, if we could, I just got a brand new battery operated one. The new ones, I've had one for 10 years. They are leaf blower. They are so powerful. Problem is the battery only lasts about half an hour. So you need a few batteries. So, there are downsides, but you guys know enough about this. It's something we need to, it's on so many people's minds, so much discussion around town.
Just so I'm clear, it's not just the noise issue, it's also air pollution you're concerned about.
I mean, for me, that's the big, obviously the number one thing is the health of the workers, because occasionally you see them with protecting their hearing with it, but you never see them with an N95 mask on. That's I think is, a serious health hazard to all of us, but especially the people who use these machines. I never see them with a mask on.
One of the things I've heard about moving to electric engines versus really 2-cycle engines. Some are 4-cycle for the larger lawnmowers.
They're
But
a little better.
one of the challenges, as you mentioned, is that the batteries don't last that long. And if you're in a commercial situation, we're going lawn to lawn to lawn, or you're doing it for the town, you'd have to have quite a lot of batteries with you, and then you have to go back to a truck and then put a new battery in. I'm wondering if there's a solution you would suggest on dealing with the battery replacement issue.
I'm not an expert. I'm certainly not asking Tigers people to do this tomorrow. But for residents, if we could, as I'm planning to do, have one when the guys come to our property, and I don't blow the leaves every week. Give them the leaf blower and 2 or 3 batteries, get it done. I'm sorry if I'm just raising problems rather than solutions.
Oh, that's fine.
I think, the batteries, like car batteries, they're getting better all the time. The one that I had, still have 6 or 7 years ago, there's no comparison, either the power or the battery life. It's what they are now. So they're getting better all the time.
You mentioned, sir, a land acquisition fund and seeking a more systemic way to fund it. Any ideas on what might be a good way to do that?
I don't think we really need to get into it. I just wanted to stress the point, because the Conservation Commission, I don't know if there's anyone here from the Board of Finance, have had some dialogue on that, and a couple of ideas have been put forward, and there's been some pushback. Another idea has been forward. I think the Conservation Commission is looking at some sort of allocation of the real estate transfer fees, whatever they call it, once the town gets like the first $1 million, and after that a share goes into the land acquisition. That's one idea, but I think this is really just, we need to find a way so that when opportunities come up, we can fund them, rather than if you leave it to just appropriations from year to year without a basis. It's going to, depending on what else is in the budget and who's on the Board of Finance. It's kind of erratic. That's what it's been up to now. We have a fund. I would just encourage a process whereby we find with the Conservation Commission, Board of Finance, ultimately the Town Council, I suppose, a way to do it on a systematic basis. And that's the one idea which I understand other towns have used, which is take some of the funds that comes from the money from property transfers and use a piece of that.
How was the most recent acquisition up on Laurel from the water company? How was that handled?
The what, the Laurel?
I believe it's on Laurel, right?
Valley,
sorry.
Oh, Valley. That proves the value of it, because it's the Norwalk First Taxing District, which is their water company, and it hasn't closed yet. But the land trust is able to do that deal and acquire that. Property which is adjacent to one of the land trust preserves, and a house which will become the headquarters of the land trust and a residence probably for the director, only thanks to the 150,000 that's built up in that fund. Without that, we would be going around this room, with a cap in hand and trying to raise funds. So it's made a huge difference, but it's going to deplete it.
Understood.
And we need to.
But the town stepped up
The town
for the balance of the funding, correct?
The town has done it's great. It's fantastic. Yeah.
So
What's happened? Yeah.
Is
the town-
there any reason
but
it wouldn't happen in the future?
It has 150,000 in it, but we were going to get all of that. But I think then the first selectman found out that if we depleted it, we'd have to go back and reestablish a new fund. So I think we're going to get 149,000 of the 150, which would be tremendous. I mean, we wouldn't be able to close it otherwise. I mean, makes a huge difference.
Mm.
And there will be more opportunities with water companies and others in the future. But that fund, there is no system. The town has made appropriations in the budget year, some years more, some years less. We just need a more systematic basis, I think, to give. There are other towns in this county that have much larger funds and do have a systematic basis for doing it, and they're probably all different.
Yeah, this is John Chris again. There is an affordable housing fund we have that's funded through essentially real estate taxes. Is something that potentially appealing as
I
a
think
way to
so,
do it
yeah,
on a
yeah.
constant basis?
I think so.
Finally, you mentioned well water, and certainly potable water is an issue for us, not just through aquifers, but everything goes into a waterway somewhere and eventually ends up in Long Island Sound. As far as chemicals on lawns, I mean, I fertilize my lawn on Sunday for my fall weeding. I use, about 80 pounds of organic nitrogen.
Organic, okay, well, that's good.
So,
That's a
and you
lot.
do it when it's wet. That way it sticks to the grass and doesn't run off as well. So you got to do that when it's a little slightly damp just before it rains. But anyway, too much information. But I mean, regarding chemicals, not just fertilizers, but pesticides, insecticides, fungicides. I mean, is this something that there should be regulated, would you suggest, or how best to address the issue, sir?
I mean, you use and I use, organic fertilizer, organic so-called chemicals. I mean, that would be the ideal, I think, rather than these ones that are toxic chemicals. I mean, potentially, cancer-causing chemicals. Don't want to dwell on it, but I mean, it worries me when you're surrounded by neighbors who, every 3 or 4 times a year these yellow signs go up. That's it's not obviously it goes into the Ripperwan River or the Norwalk River, and it ends up with the municipal drinking water as well, I suppose. But when your next door neighbor is using chemicals on the lawn several times a year, or fungicides, insecticides on their shrubs, it's a concern, certainly for me. So I wanted to raise it. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Ken,
you. Any more questions, fellow commissioners? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the time.
Anyone else would like to speak? Ms. Bates.
Hi, thank you. Robin Bates Mason, 155 Parish Road. I could probably talk about a few things, but I'll limit it to 2. The first thing I'd like to see in New Canaan take more of an active role is with our canopy, with the trees. The town did use about $200,000 in ARPA funds to plant new trees. They'll be going along South Avenue. The issue is that every year in the town budget, there's about, Tiger's here, about $250,000 for the tree budget. The 500,000, but I believe that's mostly going for removing trees and trimming. The issue we're having right now with ash trees dying, now beech leaf disease, the leaf, trees are, the beech trees are dying. We're not going to have enough canopy, and that I know that seems odd in New Canaan, but I really think, we were lucky we'd use the ARPA funds, but I think going forward, have a long-term plan to add more money towards actual replanting of specifically native trees. When possible. Norwalk did just get $1 million federal grant for planting trees. So So it'd be like that. And it would also be nice to see if we could have something more in place through the town to remove invasive trees within the parks. Especially these wing euonymus, they change the pH of soils. They get everywhere, as well as the tree of heaven, I'm forgetting the Latin name, but they're an issue. They are a host for the thank you, the spotted lanternfly. I only had 3 programs on that. So I'd like to see on the trees. Also, I'd like to mention with the transfer station, recycling is a problem. The single stream recycling, it's confusing. It's not getting well done. If anyone goes to material recovery facilities, the MRFs, and sees what's happening, it's not great. It would be nice if our town, like other towns, were to remove glass from the single stream, at least at the transfer station. Other towns have programs where maybe they're not paying tipping fees. I'm not sure on this, and I'd have to get if Katie Owsley knows more, and Tiger, but they have someone that can pick up the glass. It would be an educational thing for residents, though, because once you've been trained one way, to get people to go another way. But when we have Plant New Canaan, we've been at the material recovery facilities. They've said, please get the glass out of here. It's contaminating the plastic. It's an issue. Another thing, it'd be nice if our town, if we in our transfer station, we start thinking about more space for a food scrap recycling program. There does need to be a lot more education in food scraps recycling. We're seeing a lot of plastic, but there's not enough space. The issue is in Connecticut, we're down an incinerator in Hartford.
Yeah.
We're now shipping garbage out.
Yeah.
The Wheelbrader in Bridgeport, which is our local incinerator, they're at full capacity. And with about 20 to 25% of all municipal waste being organic material, it's something that we could be a leader in sustainability for our town in growing that program. And I'm just going to focus on those 2 because I could go on, but do you have any questions for me?
I have a few, if I may, ma'am.
Yep.
Starting with the tree canopy, I hear you on the ash trees dying. I think in our property, we had in the last 2 years, maybe 6 down, big trees. They're not cheap to cut down, by the way.
That's why the budget goes
Yeah,
towards.
and actually one across the road from us fell down and knocked a wire down once. So that was no fun. But I hear you on that. And so what I'm hearing beyond that, as far as funding issues, is that, like it or not, various trees we have are going to be gone and they need to be replaced with something. And so because of that, there's an additional expense coming in near term years to, one, remove these trees, and second, put something else in their place, simply because they're dying more quickly than we'd planned. And so I hear you on that. I also hear you on natives and exotics. I mean, should there be some type of rule that anything, at least on town property, has to be native or exotic? I mean, this are native and not exotic, because this commission has been fairly diligent in doing this with, various landscape designs.
I think it's a little difficult. Newtown, Connecticut does have an ordinance where everything on
Yeah.
town property has to be a native. I think the issue I don't know if that's exactly the right way to go for New Canaan. We have a lot of different groups that are kind enough to plant enough on our town parks, being
Mhm.
Beautification League, Garden Club, and it would be controlling those groups. But I think to have a policy, and I believe there's already one in effect, that nothing invasive could go, but if there could also be a policy where we start removing, when we see these tags of these trees of heaven, the wing euonymus, and particularly the Japanese barberry, which are tick. Magnets.
Line to these. Yeah, I
Yeah.
hear you on that. They're hard to get out. You really need a pick to get them out. At least I have to.
You keep on cutting them back, it will eventually kill them. But if there was an actual policy set in place going forward where that's addressed in our town parks, and hopefully education for our residents as well.
Fair enough. Also, on the transfer station on composting, I think it's Ridgefield has a new composting machine, I want to say, which is not only for leaves, but household compost.
So
Could you share any comments on that, please?
So Katie Owsley can come up and speak. I just throw her under the bus. She actually did a tour recently. So I've done the tour of Stanford, where they've had a composting machine. And from what I saw from their facility, and I went with Don Smith, the superintendent of the transfer station, it wasn't 2 years ago, I think, 2 years. That one was not very good. They were still trying to, it just didn't work.
Okay.
But I think Ridgefield has a different, and they have a really good program set up. So I will let Katie, I'm sure she's going to come up at some point, talk about that.
Okay, that's helpful. Any other comments, Ms. Bates Mason, you would like to share?
I mean, I could
Any
go on.
comments from the,
And just a
oh, please.
clarification. Thank you, John. So Chris Herring, one of the subcommittee members. So on the, thank you for these comments. On the canopy standards, do you have any thoughts on benchmarking and prioritization of canopy? So
I don't actually, my fear is, we're pretty, Norwalk just got the $1 million grant, but New Canaan's canopy compared to theirs is so much more. But my concern is we're really going to start losing it. People don't realize how many beech trees are in there, especially if you walk through Waveney and some of the trails along Waveney, there are dying beech trees, and those are going to have to come down.
So, yeah, so what I was, makes sense. And I've certainly seen the beach and it's sad to see. So, so if, for example, we were to do a survey today and say 80% of New Canaan is canopied, and do you want to see, the town deviate from that no more than 15%? So for example, if we were to lose 15% of our canopy down to,
I think it'd be nice for every tree that comes down, it gets replanted. So look at it kind of that way. So when we're going, we have this $500,000 tree budget, it's there, it's supposed to be for both trees and coming, planting and trimming and removing. But because of the issues we're having right now, we're just removing. So if we could, almost, take it, if, okay, one comes down, we replace it.
okay, regardless of whether it's in a park or if it's in downtown or if it's in private land.
Yeah. And also, I think, I don't know this, but I know that I believe P&Z, their guidelines, or in the P&Z that there's supposed to be trees for the heat, to help with the heat in parking lots. There's supposed to be trees in the parking lot, but we don't actually follow those rules for, it is a P&Z rule, right?
Well, we don't have any coverage.
Coverage in lumberyard, or I know in the
Yeah.
center school lot. So it'd be nice to put some trees in there as well, just to help with the heat effect.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions from?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I think we had someone on Zoom. We're to alternate. There's someone with a hand raised on Zoom. We'll go to that person. What's the name? If you could turn on your microphone and camera, please.
Good evening, folks. I just wanted to make a brief comment about something that was brought up earlier regarding leaf blowers and power equipment. There have been meetings with the ordinance committee discussing the issue in the past. And one of the things I want to point up, and I don't want to solve this, I don't want to solve the problem tonight. One of the things I want to bring up is that a one-size solution doesn't fit all. A leaf blower that lasts for 30 minutes doesn't help homeowners who have 2 acres like I do. It often takes 2 or 3 hours to clear property of leaves and brush. And so I just want those comments included in your group so that when they do try and look at a solution, if at all possible, that's not a one size fit all. And that's all I wanted to bring up.
Okay. Thank you, sir. If you could take your raised hand down, and we'll move on to someone in the audience. We'll start over here on the left.
Good evening, Julie Marcus, co-president of the Garden Club, New Canaan. And I just wanted to speak to the blowers. I wasn't planning to, but I have asked around a little bit. I spent a lot of time in California where they have limitations on the blowers. And I have spoken to some smaller landscapers who are challenged by it. And as I look at our community and I wonder how we will, if we go forward with this, how will we make sure that these smaller landscapers can compete with some of the larger organizations that can afford to invest in it. Larger groups can afford big charging stations that they bring with them from place to place. It's pretty expensive to do. Some other towns are talking about doing exchanges, so you might be able to have a battery exchange in town somewhere. Some towns talk about an exchange program for the gas blower. If you bring a gas in, you can exchange it for a battery. And if we might come up with a fund of some sort or a place where some of these things could happen, because the people who are carrying their batteries have to plug into someone's property, and the charge is really slow. And these properties are large in New Canaan, so I am all for it. I hope we can, come up with a system, but I think we also have to think about who's coming into the town, who's operating, and how we're going to make it something that everybody's able to participate in.
Thank you. One thing on the leaves, if you want to go totally eco, you just leave them there over the winter. Many critters nest in the leaves, sort of like a big blanket. And if you remove them, then they don't have any place to live. And then you just grind them up with the mower, and then a lot of them will simply disintegrate and return to the soil. And if you blow them away a little bit in the spring, there's less to blow away because it's been chopped up and returned to the soil. So that's one solution. But then you have to look at the leaves, which some people don't like to do.
Absolutely. And I would suggest we start that in our town properties, that we, have an educational system, where paths are cleared, but then the rest of the area, you see the leaves and they are doing what they're supposed to do. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities that we could be working on as far as advising and educating our population in our town parks, whether that's using pesticides or leaving our leaves. So I think there are opportunities. I don't think you're going to convince the town of New Canaan to leave their leaves without some really good education on it, because everybody likes a pristine yard. So I think you're fighting that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments from, thank you. Anyone, let me look on Zoom to alternate. Anyone on Zoom would like to speak? No one on Zoom?
Someone just raised
They've got
their
one
hand.
now, so they put it up. And Silvio, and then we'll go to the room. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Great. Hi, I'm Ann Silvio at 929 Weed Street. I'm also a member of the New Canaan Conservation Commission, a recent member. And I'd like to speak on a couple of things and add follow-ups to previous discussions. The first thing is the Open Space Land Acquisition Fund. I wanted to just flag for you all that Chris Shipper has been working on this for a while. And he's been updating our commission about the mechanism that already exists for this fund. And he couldn't be here tonight, unfortunately, but I'm going to encourage him to pass along some information so that you can have that on the record. But I know that's a major issue for the commission, and we want to encourage the team writing the POCD to look back at the results. I don't know if you have handy the ranking in the results from the community survey that listed how high open spaces are for this community, how high they are ranked in the results. Does anyone have that handy? Sarah Carey, maybe?
We're looking it up.
Yes, I can
Give us a
pull that
minute.
up very soon.
Great. So, so I know it's important to people in this town. It's one of the things that makes this town great. And I think we're at 12% protected open space, and I believe the state of Connecticut has the goal of getting to 21%. So I also want to move on to the issue of dark skies, which I don't think has been mentioned yet tonight, but the importance of dark skies. So many people move here from the city for the sort of rural, to get away from the bright lights of the city, only to find some neighbors have lit up their properties, like Times Square. And, the town planning and zoning rules actually are pretty good on this, but it seems to be with, new development, especially, and landscape design companies, there seems to be an increasing number of trees lit up, 200 to the treetops, and the impact on migrating birds and fireflies and winged creatures of all kinds is significant. So, so there's that. I'd also like to comment on the reduction of chemicals and gas-powered leaf blowers. And I want to just add one thing here, and that is not everybody likes a pristine lawn in New Canaan. And I think there are people who are starting to reduce their lawns and increase the wild areas of their properties, and seeing the value of, you know, creating basically a food web, you know, supporting the biodiversity of your backyard. And I think someone mentioned education and incentives. Maybe there's best practices that the town could sort of, you know, create and encourage people to adopt. So and also one thing that hasn't been brought up, which is on the ranking, I think it's maybe third on the ranking, is the need for bike lanes and safer streets. So speeding is a problem here, and we really need to make this town more walkable and bike friendly. There are a lot of kids who don't learn how to even ride a bike in this town because their mothers won't let them on the roads. So, you know, we want to, I think, you know, have safe streets here, smart streets. And there have been, there has been, you know, there have been improvements on that, but I think we have a long way to go. And there's so much that we could do to make this town a little bit less, you know, of a car town, and more walkable and easier for kids to ride safely around town.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission?
No.
Thank you. Switched in the room. Anyone in the room would like to speak on this topic? The gentleman in the middle. You have to speak at the podium.
Good evening. My name is Richard Trorkin. I'm at 136 Douglas Road, and I'm also on the board of the Waveney Life Care Network, which is not related to the topic that I'm going to talk about. I wanted to talk about resiliency of our utilities network. I wanted to just state a couple of facts and recommend that we include in our long-term plan some sort of goals for improved resiliency. So in Isaias, tropical storm Isaias, we had about 90% of the town without power on day one. By day three, we still had about 60% of the town without power. And by day six, almost a quarter of the town was still without power. Hurricane Sandy, roughly 70% of the town was without power on day one. Roughly 50% was still without power on day three. And by day seven, we still had almost 30% of the town still without power. So what I would propose is that we include in our long-term plan is some strategy to modestly improve that. Just to give some ideas of what we could say as goals in our long-term plan would be, at some point far out in the future, we would be in a position where if we had another storm of a similar magnitude as, let's say, Isaias or Sandy, only 50% of the town goes without power day one. By day three, only 30% of the town was without power, and that no New Canaan resident should expect to be without power after the fifth day.
Sir, on the 28th of November, we're having another community forum, and it's specifically on town and educational infrastructure with utilities of all sorts being part of that.
This is not part of, I thought resilience was part of this. Oh, I can.
It is too. It is too. We just wanted to highlight that there is one specifically on that. And certainly you may speak tonight, but it's that's also a topic or a topic area that I'm sure we brought up then. And I would encourage you to attend that meeting and to share your views then. There'll be other people who probably speak on utility issues as well. So it's an FYI, put it that way.
Okay,
Fair enough.
thank you.
You have a question?
Oh, well, thank you for coming out. We spoke at the last event at Living Care, or at the Lapham Center rather. So I think in that conversation you highlighted that you, through the Utilities Commission, would potentially suggest, you know, prioritizing certain trunk lines and sort of identifying investments in the town infrastructure to prioritize running power lines that are ground in certain more vulnerable sections with higher density to achieve. more
Correct, yeah.
resilience that way.
So you can take a quantitative approach to this. You can look at where power was lost in Isaias and Sandy and say which down lines produce the biggest amount of residents without power. You deal with those first in terms of your long-term strategy. Then what was the next one that was the next biggest? You deal with that, and you just keep going until you've got your goal, which is a certain amount of residents now protected.
What does that mean to you, protected? What type of resiliency do you foresee to reinforce the infrastructure?
Well, there can be several strategies for improving resilience. The main one in our town is protecting the wires from the trees coming down. That's where the overwhelming majority of the outages happen. So this would be undergrounding of the utilities most of the time, but there are other things you could do, such as dual sourcing of lines, so that if a section of town loses their main source, let's say going up 123, it can also be switched over from, let's say, 106. So there could be those kind of strategies as well. But the primary way would be putting utility wires underground, because that's what's driving it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
I believe you have one to alternate again to Zoom. We have someone with a raised hand. Is Ms. Lavastik?
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Betty Lavastik, Old Norwalk Road. Two topics, one that Robin Bates Mason mentioned a bit earlier in tonight's program. It has to do with the spotted lanternfly. What I noticed on Channel 12 News and also WABC in New York City, Westchester County has their Parks Department, their maintenance crew actively eliminating spotted lanternflies in the town's parks by using shop vacs, climbing up the trees and sucking the spotted lanternflies out. There has been a huge problem, in particular in Kiwanis Park, where not only are the spotted lanternflies on the trees, but they're also on the ground, on the buildings. And in my case, when I sat down with a group of people to enjoy a meal, the flies are just hitting the people, very aggressive, which I didn't know that they do. So I wish that the town could take a more active stance on this issue. The second thing that I think also is important to tonight's discussion, New Canaanite did an article on the Saks playing fields to be surveyed for artificial turf installations. And what I read, there were over half a dozen comments after the article, actually very strongly against artificial turf with mention of chemicals, groundwater, and so forth. I'm not an expert in that field, but I would like this topic before we approve anything and go full speed ahead on artificial turf, that we really bring this subject to the floor with parents of children who do sports on these fields. What are the pros and cons of artificial turf versus natural grass? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions from the committee? No. Thank you. Switch to the room. Anyone in the room would like to, ma'am?
Hello, Amy Murphy Carroll, 43 Chichester Road. I just want to reiterate concern about the tree canopy, as Robert brought up, but I also, I've been on the Board of Finance for a number of years, and this is me as a personal citizen talking about it, but I would really like to see us investigating as we look at our town parking lots expanding the tree canopy. I believe it is in P and Z to do it. I know it would be some consideration in terms of potentially losing some spaces, might make maintenance a little more difficult. But the difference in a tree canopy and not having one in hot weather is really incredible. A couple of years ago, I was outside of Detroit, and I went from the town right next to Birmingham, which is very like New Canaan. The town before it had 0 trees. You entered Birmingham, the heat dropped. So I think it would make an incredible benefit for the town, and the beautification part of it would be a plus as well. I realize maintenance might be a little more difficult, might need to lose a couple spaces, but I think the overall benefit to the town visually and in terms of minimizing our heat canopy would be very positive.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question on that front? So, so as a Board of Finance member, would you see any?
And speaking as a person. Yeah.
Right, okay. So if you were to imagine a person on the Board of Finance,
who could that be?
and
Yes.
what they would be thinking about, how would you, as a person in that position, think about incenting private landowners to, for example, Walgreens, for example, Lumberyard, put a tree in their parking lot, and what financial incentive would the town or that person be willing to kind of put on the table to create that incentive?
Well, the lumberyard is ours, so we'd be the.
Sorry,
that one.
the
Yeah.
the lumberyard company that owns Weed and Duria, and I was referring to the organization, not the lumberyard.
Okay, sorry. That's a good question. That's and worth thinking of. Now, from a town perspective, I think it would be an investment on our end. We have tried to increase the money for tree maintenance over a number of years, but as we're noting, it's unfortunately now for taking down as opposed to adding. So, but that is a good thought of how it could be incentivized. You could get a lot of bragging rights for it in terms of just improving it. But the difference in a tree canopy in open asphalt is huge. And one thing I don't have any knowledge on, and I'm sure Tiger has stuff on this, are there different surfaces rather than asphalt? I think they're much more expensive, more difficult. They drain better. It would cost money, but it's only getting hotter and hotter here. And so I think this is something we should look at as a potential investment going forward.
Thank you. We have someone on Zoom. Could you state your name, please, sir? You're on mute, sir.
Turn your mic on.
Marty Skrlunas, 152 Millport Avenue. I would like to add to the concern about dark skies and the importance of them to the value of our community, the value of continuing to bring sophisticated buyers to the community. One immediate concern is our town itself doesn't follow its planning and zoning rules regarding lighting. They have allowed Eversource to switch out all of the lights on our streets with unshielded bright white LED lights. So that's directly against our planning and zoning rules and regulations for lighting. And it poses a safety hazard for some individuals as well, not just an aesthetic, when that bright pinpoint of light is in their vision as they're walking towards traffic or for that matter, driving against traffic. It's sort of like looking into the headlights of a car coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, I would just encourage you and everyone that if anyone is aware of a violation of planning and zoning rules, signs, anything else, please alert our town planner, who is the enforcement officer, and she manages those. So we need people to speak up and let her know. I know members of the commission, when they see something, they pass it on, but they can't be on every street all the time. So we really rely on people to, I don't seem like you're narking on someone here, but you know, to the extent you see a violation of rules, you should pass it on to her. She is the enforcement officer and she's responsible for it. So thank you.
Right. Well, this one I mentioned, just thinking of long-term planning thoughts to continue to make this a desirable town for residents. Definitely not trying to narc, but passing on an observation. And actually, to add on to the comment about treed communities, I just spent a week in Westlake Village, California, where all of the parking lots are heavily treed, including Costco, McDonald's, Target, etc. So there is some teeth in their plans that new businesses have to follow.
I hear you. Just as an FYI, sir, and to others, when this, correct me if I'm wrong, fellow commissioners, but when this commission approved the changes at St. Aloysius Church, which included redoing the parking lot, we required various islands to be put there to be installed with trees. So we've done some of that, but I understand about the some of the issues there. So thank you for bringing that up.
All right, thank you.
And we reduced the parking requirement as a result.
Yeah, you do lose parking with
Yep.
the islands, and they are a bit tricky. I'd be a little more careful where you dump the snow too, and the snow plows ripping up curbs and trees can be challenging. But thank you, sir. Anyone? Actually, I saw. Please.
Thank you.
First Selectman Moynihan.
Hi, Kevin Moynihan, 330 Elm Street, and the current first selectman.
I'm glad I got that right. Okay.
I just want to make a point that, you know, the POCD is important to express a policy. And when I was on the town council, I authored the land acquisition fund, which is authorized by Connecticut statute. And I thought the town council was the policymaking board, but I think it's important that the POCD actually reemphasize that we want open space. And it's for the purpose of being strategic. We have to have a fund like Westport and other towns have. Some towns have borrowed with bonding to create a fund. There has to be a funding mechanism, and we have to be strategic because we want to protect our parks. There's land around some of our parks we'd like to acquire. And there's also a water company, especially the second taxing district water company. So I just would encourage you to express the policy preference that we expand open space and be strategic about it, to have the Board of Selectmen and to be able to do acquisitions when we need them. Thank you.
So, because you're in a unique position to comment on this. So with regard to the funding mechanism, do you feel that there should be a funding mechanism tied to transfer tax?
Chris Tripper, as chairman of the Conservation Commission, addressed the Board of Finance on that subject. I think it's Governor Lowell Weicker, when they wrote the statute, said that was one of the purposes of the conveyance fee to fund open space purchases. So I think when you express policy, you got to follow through. So I think Chris should convey to you what he conveyed to the Board of Finance. And though unfortunately, this town can afford to fund open space. The Board of Finance tended to want to say, well, we don't like pockets of money for various purposes, but this is an important priority for this town, to be strategic, to acquire things when they become available. We did a great thing with Irwin Park, but Irwin Park is really a park. And we really need protected open space to protect our aquifer and to protect, in many cases, land around our parks and locations that become available when they become available. So you need a fund to be able to be strategic.
Yeah, first of all, I hear you on the tree issue, that if you don't buy it this year and you put the tree in 5 years from now, you're 5 years behind in the tree growing. And
Well, we did authorize $200,000
Yeah.
for trees from ARPA funds. So we have some money besides the annual budget. We really don't plant enough trees with our annual budget. So
Understood. Thank you, sir.
thank you.
Is there anyone in Zoom?
Don't see anyone.
Is there anyone here in the? Okay. Ma'am, why don't you do it? And sir, I'll get you in right next. Okay, thank you.
Sarah Vandervoort, Cheese Spring Road. Since I've lived in New Canaan, which has been more than 30 years, the character of the town has greatly changed in that there are far more large houses and far fewer ranch houses, small houses that basically have got demolished and turned into large properties. This is, I think, a space issue, but I think it's also an issue to do with people like seniors who are looking for a house on one level. And having spoken with real estate agents I know, I hear that every time a ranch house comes on the market, the price goes up because there are a number of people in town or people coming to town looking for one floor living, but not so much out there in inventory anymore because they've been gobbled up by the larger houses. One of the things I have been thinking about, I know things have come up about high density housing, for instance, on a property on, I believe it was Weed Street. Is there a possibility that when some larger lots come up, that they could be divided into two or allow two houses? Maybe it could be restricted to a house on one level with just 2 or 3 bedrooms. Maybe there could be subdivisions, but I do think there is an issue for people who are seniors in the town, and I think there are a growing number of us, and the need for smaller houses. I think that is an issue for the character of the town, for the population of the town, and just to address the needs of the population in general.
Thank you. Just as a FYI, ma'am, let me get the date correct. Give me a moment here.
It's the 14th.
14th of December. We will be, this committee will be holding a specific meeting on housing in the downtown. And certainly this would be one of the topics I'm sure that will come up along with many others. So I would encourage you to perhaps attend that meeting as well. And you're being, of course, invited to speak if you wish.
Okay, but I think it needn't necessarily just be in the downtown. I could sort of see that, there are people who might want to buy a house on Cheese Spring Road, for instance, that it could be also out on 2-acre lots where you allowed this to happen. And maybe you could specify it had to be, if you put 2 properties on there, it had to be a certain type of property or for a certain age group, but I'd be happy to come and speak on the 14th.
Thank you.
So just a quick follow-up, Senator Ort. Just so are you familiar with the term of cluster housing? Okay. Well, sometimes what people propose is the notion of taking a 2-acre lot and then having, say, half of the acreage allocated to open space and then the remaining acreage allocated to 2 or 3 smaller kind of cottage-like homes, such that you kind of give up the development rights to 1/2 of the property in order to then cluster development on the other side. That would allow for a smaller lot and kind of the economic viability, but also allow for open space on the other. In a place like Cheese Spring, it's popular in Vermont and some other locations. So is that?
No, I'm not familiar with that, but I know, in places like Cheese Spring, there's a lot of wetland in a lot of areas, so it could lend itself to that because I know, for instance, the property I live in, I live on a lot of its wetlands, so, it couldn't be built up anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I promised the gentleman here to speak, so please come to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Haik Kapukjian. I just wanted to follow through after Kevin Moynihan made the point of funding open space purchases. I think we're all in favor of that. There's a little known provision in the planning and zoning regulations as they exist now, where if the development occurs, and anyone correct me if they care to, 10% of that development is to be set aside for open space. In some situations, that's worked marvelously. The place where I know that is the green link between the Nature Center and Irwin Park, where there was a sliver of land that allowed us to connect the Nature Center and Irwin Park, which is outstanding. And every time I drive by there and see people walking on that little trail, it's like thumbs up, kudos to everyone. But in other cases, there's just a little patch of land that is meaningless. It often becomes a place where people put trampolines and things like that, and really doesn't contribute to the sense of open space. In the current planning and zoning regulations, there are provisions that the Planning and Zoning Commission has the authority to, instead of having land, have a cash value for that as an alternative. And I propose that would be an excellent way to start to fund the open space fund. It's there. We've just not, excuse me, we've just not begun to enforce that.
So sir, if I understand you, so instead of dedicating the space, you do a cash in lieu payment?
In certain places, the space makes sense. If it's adjacent to a nature center property, the land trust property, having a quarter acre or a half acre makes sense. But if it's just a little piece of property that sort of blends into my backyard where my kids are riding mountain bikes and go-karts and things like that, it doesn't really serve the purpose that we have. And within our existing regulations, and I can show you at a later date, I don't have it.
Where are the regulation? Actually, I think it was the last PNC meeting or before, we had a subdivision, and a significant amount of the conversation was regarding literally where to draw the line on a section of open space on that property that was being subdivided. So certainly this commission is aware of it and has taken action. I think the point you bring up is an interesting one, which is, let's say you have scattered open space around the town versus perhaps it's somewhat less open in various building lots, but that you're getting money from those, let's say, homeowners through some means, and you're buying larger pieces of land that's more concentrated, perhaps more environmentally sensitive or something like that, and doing it that way. That's another way to skin the cat, which is what I'm hearing from you, sir.
Exactly. And we actually have a mechanism in place. I've met with the town attorney a number of years ago who felt that was there. We just had to enforce it.
Okay, that's helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll try Zoom. Anyone on Zoom? No one on Zoom. Okay, sir, please.
Good evening. I'm Keith Simpson. I live on Wardwell Drive. I'm a landscape architect here in town, and a couple of issues really. One on the regarding your own planning and zoning regulations. I've done a lot of plans for commercial properties in town, and there is a requirement in the regulations which calls for islands within the parking lots and for there to be planted and for there to be trees there. Frequently those trees actually do go in, but they often are not maintained, and then they are taken out. And that's the end of that, unfortunately. But at least the regulations ask for new commercial projects to include that. The second point I'd make is I hope we don't get too purist over native species. I mean, we've lost the American chestnut, we lost the American elm, we lost a whole lot of ash trees. We're at risk of losing the beech trees. The native species are not always the anchor that we might have thought they might be. And the nursery community spend a lot of money, a lot of research money in developing varieties of species which are stronger, have greater structural integrity, are more disease resistant, and so on. So I hope we can broaden our thinking beyond just native species. And even the sugar maple we hear in certain parts north of here is also struggling now. So, one by one, you get the native species and they get picked off. We really need to replant, I think, with trees which are proven by the nursery community to have a good chance of moving forward. On another topic really related to public safety as well as environmental issues, I'm very concerned about the structural integrity of dams in town. Now, the dams are regulated by the state, only by the state, and the town has no jurisdiction over dams. But it's a very small department up at the state that regulates the 4,000 dams in Connecticut, which need their attention, deserve attention. We have a lot of dams which are privately owned. Some are owned by the reservoirs. The biggest ones owned by the water companies. But I do believe that, and many people, I rebuilt a lot of dams here in town working with structural engineers. We put them back together again. We got in a good core. They're good for decades and decades and so on. But I think every few weeks now, we hear about a tremendously intense storm somewhere over Massachusetts, somewhere over Connecticut, all over the world, which put much, much greater pressure on the dams and on water systems than they've experienced before. It was only a year or two ago. I remember the first selectman saying, I can't remember why we had such an intense storm within such a short period of time. The problem with dams is that every downstream dam is really dependent upon the structural integrity of an upstream dam. So if you go upstream and you find that a dam well up in your watershed is not being maintained, by the time that dam fails and comes down with all its water loaded with the debris from the dam, it puts another stress on a dam downstream of that, which would have been fine had that not occurred. And I think you only have to read what happened to downtown Norwalk in the 1950s when there was an immense storm over the Norwalk River. And dam after dam after dam failed and failed and failed, and it arrived downtown Norwalk and came in as like a 15-foot wave of river to the downtown. So I know it's a state regulated issue, but I think that the town should have the right of access onto private properties where dams are owned for the purpose of inspecting a dam for its structural integrity. And I'm thinking about this for downstream owners who have a very real interest in how well dams are maintained. And some are maintained very, very well here in town. I've seen that happen. And some are deliberately not. And I think there's a public safety issue there. And I think the town should have right of access to be able to enforce a repair of such dams so that not a public safety hazard. Go ahead. I think you may have
a question to review my ignorance. So I'm aware that dams are a state responsibility or state enforcement. So who does that? Is there a state dam inspector who visits every dam every couple of years? How does it work?
Well, they recently put out a requirement, I mean, a few years ago, they put out a requirement that everybody with a dam of a certain size had to have it inspected by a structural engineer and report back to the state on the state of that dam. And then the state would say to them, you really should get this fixed. But if they don't, nothing actually seems to happen. What can happen is the state, looking at it from the state's point of view, you could say, well, what does the state really want? The state actually would be very happy if there were actually no dams at all, because then they wouldn't have to worry about them. So they actually have the authority to come in and take out the dam and send the owners of the property the bill for that. They can do that, and they have done that in the past on certain ones. But any of the dams that we have here in town, I think would want to be maintained and kept. But some of the dams are enormous. For example, the water company dams are gigantic. I mean, you know, above Group's Reservoir. I think from all I've read about it, and I keep an eye on that, I think it's probably in very, very fine shape and being taken care of very well by the water company. But if it were not, the consequences of that would be immense on downstream, all down Valley Road and all that area, part of the world. So the enforcement is, it's not really happening. And I think there's a public safety hazard when the storm intensities are increasing, and people are basically saying, I'm not going to, and it's not just for financial reasons. Some of them just say, I just don't care, I'm not going to do it.
I hear in the dams, I know they're very expensive to maintain, but if I look at some of the dams, there's the one on just north of Clearview, which is created a pond.
Right.
We get rid of that, the pond goes away in a hurry. There's a pond at Greenlee and Ponus. There's, of course, the one on Jelliff.
Right.
which has a water wheel. Why that wasn't micro hydro, I couldn't quite
Well,
figure out. Well, they never
we
did it,
rebuilt
but
that dam, and I think that dam is good for good a century, if not decades.
but I hear you on the maintenance issue and the risk of failing a dam. If I can maybe chat about native trees, since I'm the guy who tends to be very fussy about this sort of thing.
Right.
I hear you don't want to be too doctrinaire, but when I hear landscape architects suggesting putting in euonymus and ginkgo, I kind of get stressed.
Yeah, we don't.
And you still hear that sometimes, which surprises me, but I hear you on that. There are any number of cultivars that maybe aren't quite pure, but are pretty close.
Right.
But
yeah, it's just not to be too purist about it. I think, if we say just, native, I think we can look for the best varieties and so on. And we want to maintain a tree canopy in town, and we want to get the tree of heaven out of there and a lot of the Norway maples out of there. But but I agree. Generally speaking, we really want to get native as close to as we can in there.
Well, I certainly would personally. I'd like to see some more plantings of some of the new hybrids of the American chestnut. Actually, I planted a few in one of the land trust properties a number of years ago as part of the American Chestnut Foundation. They're working on redoing this.
I know they are. We don't have an example of that in town. It's at Greenwich Audubon, and it's in Wilton too, I think. And I would love to see a stand of American chestnuts established here. We'd have to protect them. But I would like to see us participating in that very much so. This is one other thing I may mention,
Yes,
which
sir.
is sort of in the look of downtown. As you know, from a zoning standpoint, we have property lines downtown and we have building lines. And some people aren't always familiar that there's such a thing as a building line. But the building line is the line in front of which people may not build, commercial people may not build a building, whether or not they own property further out into the street. We have them on Elm Street, we have them on Main Street, we have them on Cherry.
Right.
I'm glad we have them. But on Elm Street, as you know, when you go down Elm Street and you get to the Playhouse, the building line jogs back for the Playhouse, and it jogs back for the bank, or what used to be the old post office years and years ago.
Yeah.
And then it goes back in again for the Whitney shop, and then it continues down a straight line. I think the building line on the other side of the street of Elm Street from the Playhouse is a straight line across. So if all of the property is between the Whitney shop and the other side of there, I think they could tear those buildings down and build right up to the property line, and we would lose that jog across from the Playhouse. I think it's a shame if that would happen, and I think that can be readily, easily rectified by the Planning and Zoning Commission by just saying, we're going to adopt an adjustment to our property, to our building line, to incorporate that, because that's an important visual component of Elm Street, in my opinion.
Fair enough. I would remind you, sir, that we're meeting specifically on housing and the downtown in December. So please, I hope you would join us then and share that then and any other views you would have on those topics.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Oh, please come. I'll get the person on Zoom next, Mr. Jay Fuzik. I will get you in a next. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't see it.
It's okay. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Gabby Beecher, 363 Main Street. So just in the way of sustainability, I wanted to encourage the town to maybe look at the number of electric car chargers we have. If anyone's keeping count, I think we're still at 1 from 2012. At the time that one was installed, there were 5 electric vehicles registered in the town of New Canaan. I'm not going to try to guess how many EVs and hybrid EVs there are now, but in addition to promoting sustainability, I think it would also go a long way to promoting traffic to downtown. People who charge cars tend to stay in town, shop, eat, and use that. It's probably more for people coming to New Canaan rather than those who already live here, since they're probably charging at home. But it'd be nice to maybe see if we can double our efforts every 11 years or so.
I think this is certainly going to be one of the issues we're to look at. When we approved the library, we required some electric chargers to be in the few parking places they have on their own property, their own campus. But I guess one of the issues we always wrestle with is how much is good to be used by someone who's just visiting town or maybe lives in town and is parking downtown, and what kind of charger. The really quick chargers are extremely expensive. And should it be free and paid for by the town? Should it be one of those you put quarters in the meter kind of thing?
Well, there's a
guess some
bunch,
issues we're
of
looking at.
ways to do it. So
Yeah.
most people, if you're driving an EV, you have like a charge point app or something on your phone. And typically, even when you pay to charge, I mean, they're happy to pay. It's still a lot less than you would ever pay for gas. I've also seen a lot of chargers where in order to keep people from just sort of plugging in and walking away and leaving it there all day and just sort of clogging it up,
Yeah.
after a minimum amount of time, the charger will impose idle fees. So if you're just leaving your car there, right, it's going to start charging you, whether it's charging or not, so that it discourages somebody from just, leaving their car parked there all weekend or something along those lines.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Wait,
I was going to get the person on on Zoom, Jay Fusik. You have your hand up.
Yes, hi, thank you. I want to make a couple suggestions or comments with regard to the existing tree canopy. And first being with regard to notice of publicly owned trees or trees along the roadways that are taken down. Current notice is essentially, as I understand it, a piece of paper that gets tacked up to the tree, and then if no one objects in a certain number of days or weeks, the tree kind of comes down. And for people to object, they obviously have to just see that notice by happenstance, essentially. And I was hoping that maybe there could be a mechanism of a more public notification that people might spot, other than by chance, if they wanted to comment on a particular tree and its removal. And the other comment, which is probably a bit more controversial, would be, is there any thought that we could give to putting a pause on bringing down some of these really old, mature trees that are on private property? So, as we all observe, we frequently see someone buys a new home and the first thing they do is take down, half a dozen 80-year-old trees or 100-year-old trees on their property. I've seen many situations where, that's been done and one or two trees have been left and they kind of frame the house, and then a year goes by and because of compaction or whatever, those trees die, and all of a sudden it's a completely, vacant property of trees. And so, is there, I'm just kind of raising the question, is there any thought that we should be giving to, when land turns over, or when a tree of a certain size is to come down, that there just needs to be some type of a pause for dialogue on those issues?
Thank you. Any question? Okay, thank you, sir.
So
I'm
just
sorry.
on that, just curious on the pause you mentioned. So right now the town regs have no impermeable coverage and no tree coverage. So right now, with the exception of building lot coverage, a person can come and clear cut their 4-acre lot, and that's within regs. They can also pave it. So that is all, there's no impermeable coverage in our regs. So I guess what I'm asking is that it's difficult to do this reverse condemnation. For example, we ran into this at the library where if you stipulate a person must keep a tree, but it's in the middle of their property and that's the only location for their house, you kind of reduce the value of their house or the viability of that property. So from a solutions perspective, one of the things we've seen elsewhere is the concept of, if a 4-acre lot has a building coverage allowance of X percentage, that the canopy coverage becomes Y percentage. So say it can be 20%, 25%, or no less than X. So are you specifically interested in old trees, or are you interested in canopy coverage as a whole? Like, what do you feel like is a direction that you think would be supported?
Well, I think both. I think certainly the old mature trees are to be, personally, I feel cherished and maintained, right? But, and frequently those are massive in terms of coverage, right? So I don't have a specific feeling one way or the other, but I think both are clearly important.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone? Yes, ma'am, please come up to the podium.
Good evening. I'm Margot Bright, 987 Silver Mine Road. And don't worry, I'm not going to talk about trees. So one of the things that's really been an issue for me and for many of the people that I know here in New Canaan, especially with school-age children, is the issue of sustainability in the schools. And I was a little surprised that it didn't come up in Sarah's recap, because I know a lot of people who have been talking about this issue. They said that they mentioned it in their survey, and they said they talked about it at Lapham as well. So I don't know if, how many people in the town realize this, but our schools do live on all disposable items. So 5 schools in New Canaan, and everybody goes to school at the lunch cafeteria and they throw away everything. So there's no composting, there is no reusable cutlery, plates, napkins, not napkins, but plates, trays, everything gets thrown away. So, as Robin has already stated, we have an issue with garbage here in the state. We're down a huge incinerator. It costs the town a lot of money to haul this garbage and, to incinerate everything. And the biggest issue is that we're teaching our children to live on a disposable economy, and they are the future of our town and our country and our planet. So I think it's something that needs to be addressed. Chairman Chris, you know that we've been talking about this for a while. Planet New Canaan, the Garden Club, the Nature and Conservation Commission, who has provided a report to you previously has we've all mentioned this. And we've even talked about, some of the organizations volunteering to raise money, do a private, funding to raise money to buy reusable supplies and even a dishwasher to do a pilot program in one of the schools. We understand that this costs money. It could change staffing. It could change electricity costs and things like that. But we need, as a town, to start looking into this so that we can start teaching our youth what they need to be taught, and would also save the town, the Department of Public Works and the town money in the long run. So I hope that this is something that we can start looking into and making actionable.
This is Commissioner Chris. I hear you on the sustainability issue. A foreign sidebar. I was in Africa not too long ago, and in this, I guess, abandoned palm oil factory, and the one of the local schools turned it into a teaching area, and it's an island, so they have a lot of stuff that floats up on the beach, and they had the kids collect the plastic, sort it, and then they had this plastic grinder. They would grind it up, and then they would melt it down and reuse the plastic for floor tiles and soap dishes and many other things. So I thought it was great. It's a great educational activity. You learn about marine biology, you learn about chemistry, you learn about budgeting a product, you learn about manufacturing, all kinds of things. A very interesting, practical thing. And so I think there are a lot of low-hanging fruit here that certainly would be useful. I remember back in the day, especially at summer camp, you had to separate out the food that was served to the local pigs that used to go into there as pig food, and everything else was washed. You didn't throw things away. So I hear you on that. It seems like very few meals are actually cooked at schools these days.
Yeah, well, there's
more assembled, I think.
no composting at any of the schools either.
Mm.
So all of the food scrap is just being tossed in the trash, and all of the materials are disposable. So we know that there are many parents in this town who are trying to teach their children to reduce waste and compost and everything else. And then they go to school and they're taught the exact opposite. So it just seems, inappropriate to me. And I know we kind of fall behind in terms of other towns when it comes to this. So just wanted to voice my opinion on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Is anyone on Zoom? I should. No, okay, please.
Thank you, Katie Owsley, 41 Green Ave. I just wanted to revisit a topic that was addressed early on in our town waste stream, both from the front end and from the back end, in that it would be great to come up with ways to incentivize businesses and to put into practice in town hall and other places. How can we reduce the waste that's actually coming in? And then subsequently, how can we more effectively deal with our waste as it goes through our processes and goes through our transfer station? And we've touched on, the composting and building the food scrap programs. We've been super lucky to be working with Tiger and with Don, and we're building those programs. The swap shop, which is there. These are all mechanisms that are taking tonnage out of our waste stream and more environmentally effectively dealing with them. And in some cases, more fiscally effectively dealing with them, or at least that's the hope as these programs grow. So I just wanted to reiterate again, we want to really reduce the waste as it comes in and more effectively deal with it as it comes out. I mean, there are businesses in town. Walter Stewart's is a great example, and Carl Chevrolet and Rosie's that they take action upon themselves. That, Walter Stewart's uses compostable produce bags and so on. How do we incent other businesses in town to do that? And how do we help them minimize the waste that they are both producing? And then how do we help them get rid of it most effectively? And again, there are other towns, as we've all talked about, and certainly people are visiting. Ridgefield has an amazing compost system that composts on site. Weston is collecting all of their redeemables, and many people know that the bottle bill that passed, the redeemables are moving from 5 cents to 10 cents. So St. Luke's in New Canaan is piloting a program to collect them. The kids at the high school have proposed a program at the high school to start collecting redeemables, but could we start doing this in a more fulsome way throughout town? In Weston, Robin and I visited last year. They make, I think it's $14,000 a year collecting, because they collect their redeemables. That will double to $28,000 when the 10 cents goes into effect. So again, this is sort of low hanging fruit, but we'd love to see if there are more creative ways that we could manage the waste stream both in and out. So
I'm still looking for a reverse vending machine that accepts all redeemables as opposed to ones that just they like to, which kind of drives me up a wall.
right. And reverse vending machines are sort of a different beast. For example, Weston, they collaborate with these other companies that will pick up the redeemables for you. So there's a cost, there's a profit split, as opposed to having an actual reverse vending system. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Marika LeBaron. I live on 141 Hemlock Hill Road. I'm standing up tonight to talk about Waveney House and something that's come to my attention. I guess the new ADA birdcage elevator that's planning to be we're putting in is actually I know there's been a lot of work done to assess the building and figure out where it goes. And the birdcage elevator was the plan. However, as they are now putting it in, they've discovered that it needs a bigger footprint than what they thought. And the plan now, I guess, is to reduce the staircase by a few feet and like carve it up here, there, and everywhere. And yeah, it's not good. So as a town person, someone who uses Waveney, someone who loves Waveney, I think I can speak for all of us that this is really not ideal. And I think they are planning to start the work very soon.
Is this because the Parks Department's on the second floor?
I don't know, but I assume, and I wonder.
Yeah.
Tiger Man, Director of Public Works. The Recreation Department is on the second floor. The accessible bathrooms are on the second floor. That's the reason for the elevator. She is correct. We have a sizing problem, but it's not by a few feet. It's actually by a few inches. So while the wall might have to move, that interior railing might have to move, we intend to take it down in its entirety, move it and put it back in its entirety. You wouldn't necessarily see a difference. We do need to put, for accessibility reasons, another railing on top of that because the railing height right now is incorrect. But we're trying to keep with exactly what is there in Waveney. We're not trying to make it so that it looks like it's a 3-foot staircase. We actually have to keep it as wide as possible for fire egress as far as it goes. So, but I'm happy to talk to you about it in a different set, in a different setting at any time you want. Right?
Right, thank you. I'm pleased someone's talking about historic preservations. This is one of our topics tonight, so check that by. Anyone else like to speak on the environmental topic? Yes, ma'am. Please come to the podium.
Linda Andros, Conservation Commission, 941 Ponus Ridge. There's been a lot of discussion on gas leaf blowers, and I just want you to know that the Conservation Commission has a lot of research on the harmful effects of gas leaf blowers. I have a lot of statistics. We prepared a 16-page presentation, which I don't think I want is the format or the forum for that tonight, nor any of the statistics actually. But I welcome anyone who has any objections to imposing restrictions on gas leaf blowers to please talk to one of us because we do have so much information. And I just want to highlight some of the problems. We've talked about their dirty engines and how they produce toxic and carcinogenic exhaust. The noise is harmful and it travels long distances. And I bet you didn't know it penetrates walls and windows. It causes, the noise levels causes hearing damage. Actually, there's a lot of studies on how it causes hearing damage, and it's especially harmful to children and to seniors. It can cause sleep disturbance, heart disease, metabolic anomalies. I can go on and on. Psychological distress. I don't know if you know that New York City is really looking at this and imposing all sorts of restrictions on noise, from air to street to entertainment, etc. Not only is it the noise of the gas leaf blowers, it's the air jets. The air jets, a single GLB can disperse up to 5 pounds per hour of ground source particulates in the air. If you all remember in the summer, how we had to wear masks because of particulate air quality. Well, the gas leaf blowers certainly contribute that, although we have no measurement of how much, but they do. The state of California has measured how much they contribute to their pollution, and they have instituted a 5-year plan of restricting, actually banning all small off-road engines. Leaf removal, removing leaves contributes to habitat disruption and biodiversity loss. Our land care practices need to be reviewed. We can have less lawn, leave our leaves, grow meadows. There are alternatives to lawns now. People are growing clover, for instance, or wildflowers instead of having the green perfect fescue or whatever. We also have to think about the land care workers. They're exposed to extremely high levels of noise and air pollution. And it's rare that I see a land care worker wear a mask, eye protection, or ear protection. And they're at the greatest risk of developing life-threatening diseases. And most of them aren't insured. And so that's an economic reason as well. And as I said, children and seniors are the most vulnerable populations to the known hazards of gas leaf blowers. So anyway, I want to mention that the Conservation Commission sponsors testing of our rivers every year. We tested the rivers for E. coli. And I'm happy to report that our tests show that we have very clean water sources, with a few exceptions but they're very minimal. We've also engaged the high school and the science team in the high school to test some of our standing waters, our ponds. And we have results on our website, on the Conservation Commission website, of the effects of pesticides, of phosphorus and nitrates that go into our standing and groundwater. Anyway, I'm happy to talk to anybody about these statistics, and thank you.
Thank you. Anyone on Zoom like to speak?
No hands up.
Anyone here like to speak on the environmental topic? Also, I'm going to do a final, okay, I'm going to call that a final call. A final call on cultural or historic also. We didn't have any takers. See if we get any now. Oh, we have a raised hand, please. No, please got to speak at the podium, please, sir. And please state your name again, please.
Sure. My name is Haik Kavukjian from 293 North Walton Road. If I could just make 2 comments on environmental issues.
Sure.
That perhaps it's policy, and maybe Tiger Man could comment on that. One of my things, which is, I won't say a P, but I think it's something it's easily addressed, is idling of motors of town vehicles. And it seems it serves very, very little purpose. I think it's a cultural thing. Certain groups, the police, and I love the police, tend to get into that.
I see the police do it too.
And it's not even a safety issue. It's not like they're directing traffic. It's not like they need the light bars going. It's just the car's pulled over, the engine's idling. I can go to the transfer station and there's a big diesel, hydraulic, whatever they use to move the equipment around. And I'll spend 5 minutes to drop something off, come back 15 minutes later, the truck's still idling there. And I could go from, department to department. I could see the building inspector with his truck just idling away there. And I wouldn't do it on my car. It's not good for the vehicles. It's not good for the environment. It's an extra cost, and it's not good for the people standing right next to that. So I think it's largely an educational matter. The other thing that, and I don't think there's any regulations about this, as we've seen Long Island Sound get cleaner and cleaner, evidence seems to point to the fact that non-point pollution is probably the leading contributor to pollutants in Long Island Sound. And what I mean by that, I'm putting fertilizer on my lawn, it's running into the river, it's going into eventually Long Island Sound. Someone else is doing the same, someone's putting an herbicide on the lawn, it's washing in there. I'm not naive enough to think that we're going to get rid of fertilizers and things like that. But evidence shows that if you're fertilizing your lawn in November, you might have a green lawn through the winter, but much of that is just going to wash through into the soil, into the river. So I've been in some communities where they actually have ordinances where after a certain time, you can't buy the fertilizer or it can't be applied. And I don't think it would be that hard to oversee that. The fertilizers are being applied by landscapers who have licenses, and it's just be part of the license that after a certain point, it's not being applied because guess what? It's going into your lawn and it's eventually going to end up in Long Island Sound. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a hand raised on Zoom, Leo Carl. Sir.
Good evening. How are you? Leo Carl, 902 Silvermine Road, Canaan. I'll have some comments about EV charging in the infrastructure meeting in a week or so, I think. So, but tonight, the one thing that has popped into my mind around the POCD and around the theme of culture, I just would like to see us document the importance to our New Canaan community of some of our annual large community gatherings, just to sort of perpetuate it in the POCD, whether it be the Family Fourth at Waveney, Memorial Day Parade, Christmas Eve caroling at God's Acre. I think there are aspects of our community that are really unique to New Canaan, and I would just like to see those documented for perpetuity, so we don't forget about them, because they're really important to the culture of our community. It brings a lot of people together. A lot of those events are times when people new to town sort of get acclimated to what it means to live in New Canaan, and I think there's a lot of good ideas shared around those public gatherings, and I'd love to see them continue indefinitely. So
I hear you, Mr. Carl. I would add caffeine and carburetors, so some people.
No, there's many more we could add to the list.
Because it's ICE cars there and they're running gasoline mostly. But you have that, we have the town players, we have the Society for the Arts, garden clubs. There's just there's a lot going on in town. I would agree with you. Wonderful. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Any further speakers on Zoom?
Well, I wanted to ask one thing. So Mr. Carl, do you see any, I guess, hurdles in the way of those things happening in the future, i.e., you know, your business, for example, underwrites some things as does other markets in town. Do you think that the town should, for example, waive fees on those in terms of permit fees or allocate funding to ensure that type of town good? Because a lot of what we're talking tonight is about town good. Whether
Yes.
it be watershed or whatever, but a lot of that has to do with people doing the right thing for their neighbors, which doesn't necessarily happen. So I guess from one of the things that we've seen with the POCD is a lot of people talk about what they want, but don't necessarily talk about how to execute against it.
Mhm.
So like when you think about having grown up in the town as you have, you know, how things fade away is at times, you know, you don't have that person taking the extra steps to make it happen. Kind of taking it out of their own back pocket. So do you see institutional changes that we can make that would add sustainability to those things?
Other than understanding that it's a whole ecosystem and infrastructure, in order to have those sort of community events, many of which are driven by private philanthropy, they're not cost to the town. The town allows public spaces to be used, but I'll take you know, the Family Fourth, we sell passes to that, so participants that go there, you know, pay an entrance fee, but there's also money raised privately to cover you know, the cost of the fireworks. Same thing with caroling on Christmas Eve. There's the Waveney Park concerts that I don't think there's necessarily the town needs to plan investments in those things, other than ensure that in order to have a thriving community, you need to have a thriving downtown, you know, business district, because a lot of those businesses do fund many of those events. And so I totally get the fact that this is it's weighing a lot of things on the scale. Just tonight, I've listened to how we want to increase our tree canopy, which is a noble goal. And we also want to reduce the likelihood of power outages. And so I totally get this, what you're going to have to deal with putting together the POCD and how weighing things, cost versus benefit, who's paying for what, how you cover things. When we get to some infrastructure things, I have some ideas on that. But as far as the cultural things I mentioned, I just think that they're important to the heart and soul of the community. And I'm not sure that, I guess I'll leave it at that. I'm not looking for the town to have to put more money into any of them, but just to acknowledge that they exist and that the town, it's one of the things that makes New Canaan a unique and special place.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Carl.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else on Zoom would like to speak? Anyone else in the room would like to speak on one of these topics? Sorry, Mr. Simpson again, please.
Excuse me for being up a second time, but I sort of wanted to have let other people have the opportunity to talk about historic preservation, and I've done a lot of work in downtown, on downtown for the last 40 years or so that I've been working professionally downtown, and I just hope that we can actually do an inventory of what we consider to be historically significant buildings downtown. I think 10 years ago, when we were doing the POCD, if it had ever been suggested that there was any question anywhere of the 1913 library building being torn down, people would have been absolutely incredulous. But what happened was that a decision was made to do that very, very secretively, and people were lined up behind the scenes and for a long time knew that the plan was to do that. And then suddenly it was made public at a time when it was hoped that maybe we could ride right through the zoning regulations, even though the plan of conservation had that in place at that time. So I hope that that doesn't happen again, and that this time that people were actually on notice that not only do we want to preserve the best buildings in town, but we put people on notice ahead of time that the actual Planning and Zoning Commission, as an implementer of the POCD, would actually view that with a very, very high degree of priority, because it was a divisive issue, as I'm sure you remember, not very recently.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.
Would anyone else like to speak on any of these topics? Okay. We will move on to the next topic on our agenda, which is any of the business that may come before the subcommittee. And think about, I would remind people that on the 28th of November, we will be having a similar meeting on town and educational infrastructure. So parks, sewers, waterways, utilities, all those things will be discussed, as well as buildings. And on the 14th, we're discussing housing and the downtown, not necessarily housing downtown, but housing in downtown. We'll be discussing those. Okay. Moving on to point number 3, we need to approve the minutes. Have the other members of the commission had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Yes. Any changes to the minutes being suggested?
No.
No.
Hear none. Do I hear a motion to accept the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, seconded by Commissioner Herring. Any discussion? Okay, do a roll call. Commissioner Nielsen,
Yes.
Commissioner Herring,
Yes.
Commissioner Redmond.
I wasn't present.
You
for
weren't
that.
present, yes. Commissioner Kriz, yes. And then adjournment. Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.